Is still the site. I believe that they still consider that particular threshing floor to be up where the Dome of the Rock sits on top of. But now what we're talking about is the site when David brought the ark, you know, when he went to Bet Shemesh and he got the ark and he brought it into the city of David. Why did he bring it into the city of David? Because that was the key place of worship. That's where the ark rested.
Welcome to Cut to the Chase with Rob Chase. Brought to you by the InlandNorthwestReport.com. Alternative news and opinion for the Inland Northwest. And now, here's your host, Rob Chase.
Hi, this is Rob Chase with CuttingToTheChase.us, brought to you by the InlandNorthwestReport.com, an alternative news and opinion source for the Inland Northwest. Today our guest is Rhonda Sand, and Rhonda has been to Saudi Arabia recently 7 times. So Rhonda, why would you do that? Why would you go back to this country that probably no one else goes to 7 times? Tell us about Saudi Arabia.
Well, it's a very exciting place right now, and the reason I've basically gone 7 times is it's taken me that amount of time to really begin to understand the depth of the biblical archaeology that's available to people who want to go and see what has been hidden for all of these years.
Oh, I thought all the Bible archaeology was in Israel.
No. You know, the prophet Jethro, as outlined in the book of Exodus, was in Saudi Arabia. We call it the land of Midian. It is on the Red Sea border. Also, there's a city there called Timon or Tema, which is very close. I'd say it's about a 2.5-hour drive. And this is where one of Job's friends, Eliphaz, was. And then, of course, we have Dedan, and we have the Kenites, and many, many people groups are actually in the land of Saudi Arabia today.
Well, I guess I beg to differ with you, because I climbed Mount Sinai in 1978. There's a monastery at the bottom there that said this is Mount Sinai. In fact, there's a burning bush.
That is amazing that a burning bush could still be there after thousands of years.
They had a little garden. That's where it was. Everything else grew fine there, though.
Right. Traditionally, the way it was is that, let's see, Constantine's mother, Helena, I think is what her name was, she went to Sinai and named that mountain as the Mountain Sinai, I think probably around 350 AD. But there hasn't been any true biblical archaeology that documents the site in Sinai as that it could be the real Mount Sinai. On the other side, though, just across the Red Sea, Yam Suf, right, which they did cross the Red Sea on Yam Suf, being on the other side of the body of water is Saudi Arabia.
The Gulf of Aqaba?
Gulf of Aqaba, which is the Red Sea, which they also have called the Reed Sea. Exactly. So just on the other side of that is where Jethro, one of the prophets for Islam, and is mentioned in the book of Exodus. This was Moses' father-in-law. This is where Jethro lived in Midian. So this is where the story of the Exodus really begins, because it's the first place when Moses left Egypt, when he had killed the slave master, I believe.
Right, yeah.
Killed the slave master, and he fled. And when he fled, he went to the land where Jethro was the main, like a high priest or something, and then met and married his daughter.
Ruel, or for Jethro, there's like another name, I thought.
Shuaib. It's in Islam they call him Shuaib. Yeah.
All right. And then Moses married his daughter.
Moses married his daughter, and Moses stayed there for 40 years. So Moses' life story is very interesting in that, of course, he was raised in the house of the Pharaoh for 40 years and gained the information and knowledge of the Egyptians. And then when he fled to Midian, he spent 40 years with Jethro learning the mysteries and things of the Midianites that prepared him to go back to, of course, Egypt and ask Pharaoh to let my people go.
So when Pharaoh was pursuing them, they kind of hot-footed across the top of Sinai Desert, clear over to the Gulf of Aqaba.
That's correct.
Okay.
This is our interpretation of the archaeology that now is laid open for us. And it actually began, I'm going to think 15 or 20 years ago with some people that had gone there and seen these things. And it was a closed country at that point. And so only now has it really been open for us for many people to see it with their own eyes.
Well, I drove by Aqaba once. We didn't go over there, but I wished I could have visited, because it figures largely in that movie Lawrence of Arabia, where the Lawrence and the Arabs went clear around through that almost unlivable desert and came and surprised the Turks, in Aqaba. They never expected them to come from that direction. But I think they call it the Reed Sea because it actually is a lot more shallow, so people that aren't really into the miracles of God could say, well, maybe, it dried up or something. But the Red Sea, I heard it was like, pretty deep, at that point.
Yeah. There are certain points of the Red Sea that are deep, of course. If you're standing on the Saudi Arabia side, looking towards Egypt, which would have been the crossing site, for example, while you're actually standing on the beach in Saudi Arabia, looking directly at Egypt, you can see the beach. It's that close.
Uh-huh. Oh.
Yeah, and then that particular area, we heard on our last trip 2 weeks ago, there was an archaeologist he's not Saudi Arabian, but he's doing work for the Saudis. And he said that in antiquity, that particular beach area was known as like the Reed Sea area, because in antiquity there were reeds that were growing there. There was fresh water that came along that beach area. And so the ships that would come into that particular area, that's how they knew where to come into port, was because the reeds were there.
There's mangrove trees growing out of the ocean water that live in salt water, along the Sinai there too.
Yeah. It could be. It is not today, although we did, just 2 weeks ago, we took pictures of reeds on the seafront. We have pictures of it. We all visited it.
Now, I've seen a picture with the underwater camera that they found like a chariot wheel. Is that where that was at? Have you seen that picture?
Yeah. Okay, so where we were standing on the beach, where the reeds are, that is looking directly over to Egypt, I believe that was a dentist, I can't remember his name, maybe 20 or so years ago, that he actually did go underwater and claimed to have taken those pictures of the chariot wheels. Now, I don't know that anybody has access to those today. I can tell you that today, they said if somebody were to be able to go down and try to find that, they would call it the bed where there should be a lot of remains that are down there. At this point in time, it would be at least 250 feet deep, and it would be under the live coral today. It could be probably found if the right individuals would come forward today, and possibly, the Lord would lay it on their heart to do this type of.
We need Jacques Cousteau again, or
yeah, we would need somebody that.
In fact, I think Jacques Cousteau did one on the Dead Sea that kind of showed some kind of shapes down there that might have been slabs, from an older town too.
Yeah.
But Saudi Arabia, I saw a documentary where, like you say, they actually thought Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabia, and it actually shows like a rock that looks like it was split in two, maybe, and water came out of it. Did you go to see anything about that?
Yes, okay. I've climbed it a couple of times. We call it the Rock of Horeb.
Okay.
And it is in what we call the land of the Amalekites, where the great battle with the Amalekites that the Israelites had. It was so interesting because even when I was there, I actually picked up a perfect in circumference round rock that had been hewn like from a sling. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
That we found right there? And then there's like a stronghold that's built up, and you can walk along that whole stronghold. And what we do with our tour groups is we allow them to walk along that stronghold and photograph and help us categorize all the inscriptions that we see. Can you imagine? This is what we do. We actually go to where the stronghold was, where possibly the battle with the Amalekites are, and people can photograph and categorize the inscriptions that they see. These are inscriptions of warriors with a bow. It can be inscriptions of ancient languages, or just drawings.
I guess we always think of inscriptions as being in Egypt proper, without them being. Of course, the Egyptians probably traveled all around themselves.
But these are not Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Okay.
These we know they're not Egyptian. The only Egyptian hieroglyphics that I have personally seen in Saudi Arabia are at what we call Aaron's altar. And this is what we call the altar, which is where Aaron, was reprimanded for putting the golden calf. And this is a huge stone altar, and all around the base of it are actually bulls are etched.
Carved in, okay.
Carved, and they're in Egyptian fashion, literally where the person is under the bull, looking up like this in true Egyptian fashion.
The Egyptians did that a lot.
And then they're also standing behind the bull like this, holding its tail with their foot forward, which is another Egyptian stance. And that is at the altar of Aaron, which is, that particular altar is at the base of what we call Jabal Allah's, which right now we believe to be the real Mount Sinai.
Oh, okay. Now, with the battle of the Amalekites, is that where Moses had to hold up his arms, and
That's right.
Joshua and Caleb held up his arms, and
That
they
is
dropped him, and then the Amalekites started. See, now our tour guide in the Sinai Desert told us it was another mountain there. See, that's where this took place. So maybe it was St. Helen again with one of her visions.
Yeah, well, we know that the land of the Amalekites was not in the Sinai, correct? It was actually in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
So all of these things are just finally coming to light because the land really has been closed. So there's been, around Jabal Allah's, there's been very little archaeological surveys that have been done. And so just now, things are really starting to open up.
Do you think the world was different then, climate-wise? I mean, guess when I was over there, I thought, how could like 1 million people even walk through? Of course, you have the miracles of God, but to wander around 40 years, or like they have these big numbers in the Bible. So maybe the area held a lot bigger populations, than the Arabs or Berbers, that they do now.
Yeah, well, I don't know, but I mean, people do live there today.
Yeah.
I mean, if you visit Jabal Allah's today, I mean, you are looking at just a stone mountain with a blackened top, just as the Bible,
I remember that.
just as the Bible said that it will be, and just under it is a cave, just as it would have been. We call it the cave of Elijah or the cave of Moses, is just under the blackened top, just as it says that it would be. Correct?
Did you go in there?
I did not personally go up, but we've had plenty of people that have gone up and gone in. But the thing is around the mountain, you'll see sheep herders with their sheeps and goats up on the mountain. So even today, there's life on the mountain.
Yeah. Now, it was so sequestered for so long. Isn't it still difficult to get into Saudi Arabia?
Well,
And to see those things?
yeah, we are authorized. All of our trips are authorized to go in by their government, and otherwise you're not allowed to go. No, it is completely fenced off. There's a sign that is there that says by order of the king, then no entrance is allowed unless you're authorized.
Now, are things kind of shaky in Saudi Arabia now, do you think? With the royal family and I think half of Saudi Arabia is actually guest workers from it, but the price of oil is way down too, so that's got to affect things.
Yeah, we had just left when that happened. I believe that the king was in a coma the last that I heard, but I know that they call him MBS. The prince is very well thought of. I know that when we're there, spirits are high. Everyone all of the Saudis that we run into, they have a high regard for the king and his family. They have a high regard for MBS. They have they have a very rosy outlook on their future. I mean, there isn't, people there are very joy-filled and.
Are they that way towards Americans?
Oh my goodness, very much so.
Okay.
Yeah, we have on our website, which is livingpassages.com, you can see a lot of testimonials of our guests that just talk about how the locals have really just done far above and beyond anything you can imagine to make our people feel welcome.
Unless you're a woman, right?
No, including women, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, definitely.
Okay. Now, you had to wear and I forget the name of the garment when you were out there.
Yeah, we call it an abaya, is the black robe, and if you cover your face, it's called a hijab. But no, the Saudis do not. We're not required in any way to wear a hijab or an abaya. The first couple trips that I went, I would wear one out of respect for their culture.
Right.
But now they've just said, no, you're Westerners, you dress as you would, you're welcome in our country, and if you, don't want to wear an abaya, you don't have to. So,
Yeah. Have you ever been up to Mecca? Or,
I have not been to Mecca.
would you like to, do you think?
I think I would like to.
Okay. I'm always interested in that big stone.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the name of it now that they walk around. It was actually, I think, was a meteor that came. Cause that's a very interesting history too, with Muhammad and how quickly that spread across, clear over almost up, up into France, within a couple hundred years after Muhammad's death,
Right.
So getting back, you've been to Jerusalem too, and getting back to St. Helen. I mean, she had all these visions, and so this is where Calvary was, and this is where Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And but archaeology's probably proved a lot of those things. Because when I was there, I thought what made sense to me was Golgotha, the skull. That seemed to me that had to be where Christ was crucified, because it looks just like a skull. It looked that way in olden times too. And then there's a tomb, supposedly the tomb of Christ, right below. So it wasn't very far to, carry him into that.
Well, and the opinions are split between what we call the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is what Helena named as being the place of the crucifixion. And this is a large church. It's very ornate, and the ownership of the church is split between many denominational churches. So that is inside the walls of the old city today. And then we have what's called Gordon's Calvary that is also called, we call it the Garden Tomb, and that's just outside of Damascus Gate. And the other half of the population believes that to be the place of the crucifixion. And both have strong reasons as far as why they could be. So I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I find both, we like to actually include both on our itineraries. The Garden Tomb, because it just has a quiet spiritual aspect to it. And then of course the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, because just the mystery and the tension almost that's there when you're there, because there's so many denominations that are represented, and it's filled with hordes of worshipers. It's a very interesting place to go to when you're in Jerusalem.
Document I saw was, of course, everyone's arguing over the Temple Mount, and some Jews want to rebuild the temple again, and reinstate the sacrifices. But this documentary said that when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, that they not only tore down the temple, there wasn't one stone left upon the other, but the entire mountain was torn down and distributed, out there too. And what's left of that area is what's called the City of David, just south of the temple. So they wouldn't really interfere with the Muslims and their worship at the Dome of the Rock, and they could build their temple over what was considered the City of David, which would be closer to where it actually was. So is there, did you see any, when you were in Jerusalem, did you see any movement to kind of get that going again? I've heard of rumors of that happening.
Here in the coming short term, I think we're going to hear a lot about a discovery that was made by Eli Shukron, and he was a premier archaeologist for the City of David and for Jerusalem. And what they found, he refers to it as Temple Zero, is what he calls it. So think about that, Temple Zero. It's not the first temple, it's not the second temple, and he's not saying anything about it being the third temple. He's saying it's before the first temple. The implications of that is it makes you question, now what do you think that's about? Well, the interesting part about this is that it was found in the City of David. And if you take Bible Gateway or take any Bible software and you go in and you search the term Zion, you'll find many, many instances of that word used. And many times, if you actually read it, it could very well refer to the City of David. Okay? And so what's fascinating about that is that what Eli found is very close in proximity, almost even on level with what is called the Pool of Siloam. What is the Pool of Siloam? in what I have learned, not that I'm an expert, is that the Pool of Siloam was one of the main pools that the priests would wash in prior to the sacrifice.
A lot of water. Well, for the population, what the population was.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
huge.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, so the Pool of Siloam is almost on the same level as what is called Temple Zero that was found a couple years after they found the Pool of Siloam.
Is there a documentary on that? That's
There is not a documentary there yet, but we actually have a very in-depth video on our website that was done between, actually it was a 3-series in-depth interview that Pastor Tim Remington in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho did, interviewing Ellie Shukron in detail in Coeur d'Alene.
Before I forget, excuse me, what is your website?
Livingpassages.com. Livingpassages.com.
Okay.
So Pastor Tim Remington interviewed Ellie Shukron in depth about Temple Zero. And then we created the last probably 4 or 5 minutes of the last video. Tim Remington gives a synopsis of everything that they had just learned. And basically what Ellie Shukron discusses is the fact that if they have found the original temple where Abraham paid the tithe to Melchizedek, because they know it is dated to the time of Abraham and Melchizedek. It is a standing stone. It is where they did sacrifices. They found the oil press. They found where the animals were sacrificed. It's in the city of David. All of these other, the pottery shards, everything dates back to this time. If they indeed found the standing stone that was used at the time that Abraham paid the tithe to Melchizedek, then this would have actually been the original site of worship.
Okay.
So,
Well, I just remember the part that David bought the threshing floor from the Jebusite.
Right.
But I didn't realize that would have been the spot where Melchizedek.
now that
welcomed
site, I believe,
Abraham.
is still the site. I believe that they still consider that particular threshing floor to be up where the Dome of the Rock
Okay.
sits on top of.
Right.
But now what we're talking about is the site when David brought the ark, when he went to Bet Shemesh and he got the ark and he brought it into the city of David. Why did he bring it into the city of David? Because that was the key
spot.
place of worship.
Okay.
That's where the ark rested. He didn't take it up. He brought it down into the city of David. So this is where the compelling potential interest in this standing stone that people are going to be able to see in the very near future resides, basically.
Because there is a society to revive the temple and rebuild it again, but they've been thinking in terms of how do we share the Dome of the Rock or that Muslim temple, and in fact this could be a totally different place and they could get along. So that would be almost prophetic if there is a third temple that's going to be built, that serves its purposes in the future.
And Ellie's stand is there might not be a reason to wait for a new temple to be built. If the original standing stone, if the original place of worship is already here, it's here. Then why would they be waiting for a third temple? This is the statement that was made.
The trouble with prophecy, you don't know really about it until after it's happened. In retrospect,
I know that's like when Jesus, when the Jewish people were waiting for him to come in on this majestic white horse carrying a banner, and he was going to slay all of the Romans, and instead he came in on a donkey, right? I mean, God's ways are not our ways, and so how can we even know what God's real plan is? I mean, we read the Word, but they read the Word too, and they misinterpreted it.
What other archaeological anomalies or phenomenon have you seen that left an impression on you?
Well, I think my very favorite place to take folks to is a place of the Samaritans in Samaria, and it's the town of Shechem.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's still there. You can see it. You can go to Samaria. And the beautiful part about it is you have on one side, you have the Mount Ebal, And then on the other side, you have Mount Gerizim. One is the Mount of Blessings, and the other, the Mount of Curses.
Right.
Just as in the book of Deuteronomy, they're still right there. And still right in the middle, you have the temple site from the time of the Samaritans with its standing stone still there that I believe was set by, if I'm not mistaken, by Joshua.
Yeah. What does a standing stone look like? Is it any
It's
particular
literally,
shape
it's
or-
an unhewn, it's unhewn by human hands, and it's literally just a, kind of like a little tall
There's
egg-shaped-ish.
standing stones all over Europe that I think were probably maybe used by pagans, but I remember I went to Scotland on a little island, and they had taken the standing stones away to use like as gates, you know, for the, but there's still one standing in this tiny little forest on this island, and it wasn't, you know, it was maybe about 4 or 5 feet tall, kind of heavy, you know, and all that, but that was still referred to as a standing stone that had spiritual significance.
Yeah.
for the
Well,
Gaelic.
just recent, how we've noticed standing stones just as recently. If you travel to Ethiopia, the land of the Queen of Sheba, which goes back to the time of Solomon, in front of the Queen of Sheba's palace, which they know for a fact was the Queen of Sheba's palace, there was a German archaeologist who did the survey on that project. Just in front of her palace is a cemetery, an ancient burial ground, and they all have these unique standing stones, these straight up standing stones. Some of them are a little tipped over now.
Yeah.
But you look out and it's a huge field. It's a burial ground from the time of the Queen of Sheba. Fascinating enough. Okay, from the time of the Queen of Sheba.
Yeah.
Okay, now we go back to Saudi Arabia, to Jabal al-Laz, which we consider to be the real Mount Sinai.
Okay.
So at Sinai, remember, thousands of Israelites died, or Hebrews died. And they were told to remove the bodies and take them away from the holy ground and bury them.
Right.
So one of the things that we take our folks to see when we go to Jabal al-Laz is we take them to this ancient burial ground. And what is there? Thousands of these same standing stones, the same ones that are at the Queen of Sheba's palace.
Are there any still skeletal remains, or they could be?
No, we don't actually
don't.
go
You
and
probably
like
get that
walk around desecrating it, but
They get touchy about that.
but it's interesting that it's the same standing stones, right? So anyway,
In Ethiopia, supposedly that might have been a place where they hid the ark.
right. So
Okay.
the reason that we take people to Ethiopia is we do an In Search of the Ark of the Covenant expedition.
Okay.
And what we do is we take them everywhere that there is evidence that the ark either was there at that time, or they have artifacts from their worship of the ark, or we take them to the city of Axum, which they say either there are replicas there still today, or maybe the original is still in one of the churches today.
Because I think there's something, not in like the 66 books of the Bible or canon, but maybe in the Apocrypha, there's something about Jeremiah, I think, maybe hiding the ark before the Babylonians came. You know, so people think, well, there's all these tunnels below the Temple Mount, maybe it's in one of those tunnels.
Right. Well, it is interesting because I think it was at the time of Hezekiah, actually, there are a couple places in the Bible, and I know this for a fact because in the British Museum they have a stone piece from the time of Hezekiah when God had told him it was time to seal up the holy places, including Jerusalem. So Hezekiah was told to do that. And we know that, for example, the temple at Arad, A-R-A-D, in kind of down in the Negev area of Israel, that they undug it and they found a standing stone and holy place there, right? Which was one of them that Hezekiah would have, I think, sealed up. But also the standing stone in the city of David is another area that when they checked the remains, the dirt and the pottery and everything, the bottom of it was from the time of Abraham. The earliest known pottery that was there was from the time of Abraham. And the highest level, so the latest date when it was sealed up, was from the time of Hezekiah. So that means potentially, this is my interpretation, of course, is that this particular room where the standing stone was found in the city of David was sealed up at the time of Hezekiah.
But there's several kings after Hezekiah.
That's right.
I think too. So
Yeah.
I guess that was better safe than sorry.
Yeah.
Back then. And what else do you think is of significance? You talked about Samaria. Aren't there still some Samaritans living?
There are a
that
few
trace their
Samaritans there.
ancestry
You know,
with
you
it?
can meet either the high priest or you can meet a family member, and they will take you through their museum, and they'll talk about how they believe that there's only just a couple hundred of them still alive today. They all live in the same community, and they'll also show you their lineage. They have kept track of their lineage, I think, since the time of Adam. This is what they have there. It's really very fascinating. So
I had a friend he's actually a Medicare Advantage insurance agent, but he's made the Table of Nations his study, since he served in the army in Turkey. Now he's been studying for 40 years. And all the trace, not just people in the Middle East, but a lot of the Germans and Italians and Greeks, traced it back to a guy named Eupator, and that's where Jupiter comes from. But actually it stands for Japheth in other countries, back up to Noah, because they're really much into those lineages. I mean, Americans, I'm like Europe Junior, I guess, with everything. My kids even more so, and grandkids, So we kind of lose those things, but a lot of those countries, that was, of course, before computers and stuff. They had the memorization. You had to get it right. You can't get one single dot or italic out of place, because otherwise the whole thing could be ruined for future generations. So I think that stuff is just really very fascinating. Well, anyway, we've gone kind of up to our time now. Rhonda, hopefully you can. Do you want to take another trip there, or is 7 enough?
We have on our website, if anybody's interested in seeing Saudi Arabia, we have, I think on our website right now, I think 8. We have 8 trips to Saudi Arabia between 2020 and 2021 right now, and a number of them are sold out. So it is a very exciting destination.
Okay, well, it's been great having you, Rhonda. Go to livingpassages.com. Rhonda's website. If you want to go to Saudi Arabia, I'm sure if she's along there, she can point out all the areas of interest, being very familiar with them. So this has been cuttingtothechase.us, and let's not forget to pray first.
This has been Cut to the Chase with Rob Chase, where we cover anything under the sun that would be of interest to you, our viewers. Cut to the Chase has been brought to you by the InlandNorthwestReport.com. Alternative news and opinion for the Inland Northwest. Don't forget to catch the Sunday edition of Cut to the Chase, where Rob interviews local pastors on Christian perspectives. Until next time, stay in prayer for God, family, and country.